In order for a market to be functioning efficiently, allocating its goods and resources at the quantity that the buyers and sellers want it, so at the equilibrium point on the supply and demand curve, a market must meet certain conditions. If one of those conditions, such as price, does not adequately reflect the cost of production, it can be caused by what's called an externality. The video 3.4 briefly discussed externalities in the idea of secondhand smoke. People that are not in the market, buyers and sellers of cigarettes, are inversely affected by the market. Same thing with flu shots. Even people who don't buy or sell flu shots are affected by flu shots. So this will show you how to understand externalities on a graph and how the market corrects for externalities or corrects for those market failures. Negative externalities. Remember, negative externalities are ones that harm, cost, or cause an inconvenience that is suffered by a third party, not a buyer or seller, due to the production of a good or service. So, they're what we call social costs. All right, and this shows a graph for aluminum. So the price and the quantity of aluminum. Let's say, for example, that an aluminum factory emits pollution that causes breathing problems for the entire population. Well, whether you're a buyer of the aluminum or a seller of the aluminum, doesn't matter. What really matters is factoring in what's called these social costs, because there are costs to people who are not buyers and sellers of the aluminum factory. Okay? So, if we were to graph this, we'd put our demand curve, our downward sloping curve, and our upward sloping curve supply, the S1. So we have our D and our S1. And we see our first equilibrium point. This is the quantity that the market would produce. That's what QM stands for. This is the quantity the market would produce, and this is the price the market would produce. So P sub M, the price the market would produce. Now, because of the externality, so this additional cost, social cost, that's not factored into production, the cost to society is actually greater than the cost to produce the actual aluminum. So, to correct for this externality, because an externality, remember, is considered a market failure, someone needs to step in. And in this case, it's the United States government. They step in to correct this externality. How do they do this? They do this by taxing. They tax the aluminum to correct for the externality. So if we think back to our list of tigers and tires, this one is specifically going to be a supply issue that the government is going to intervene. So this would be the G, or government intervention in tigers. When the government intervenes, they reduce supply. They reduce supply back to what's called the quantity that's efficient. That's what the E stands for. And then we will get a new price, a price that's efficient. So what we've seen actually is that price goes up and quantity goes down, just like in our supply and demand lines. So this graph overall represents the social costs in addition to the private costs for producing aluminum. What the government does is they alter incentives to produce so the market can correct for those failures. Because the market is in failure here because we're not adequately seeing the cost in order to produce the actual aluminum. So when the government forces a tax, it reduces the quantity and drives up the price of aluminum, which can then factor in the private and social costs of producing the aluminum. So we've corrected for the externality, which is a market failure, by driving up price and reducing quantity via taxes. All right, let's talk about positive externalities. Remember, positive externalities are ones that there is a benefit received by a third party who had nothing to do with the production of a good or a service. So let's take education. Education benefits the recipient, the person receiving the education, and it also benefits the person providing the education, such as the teacher, but it also benefits a lot of bystanders or third parties who don't have anything to do with that. Education has been proven. More education is proven to lead to lower crime rates, higher productivity, and more educated voters. which benefits everybody, even those not considered in the education field, whether they're the recipient or the provider. But given the market as it stands, the market, QM, would produce this much education at this much of a price. However, a positive externality has a social benefit to society, so the government needs to do something to correct for the market failure in the fact that there is not enough education. So the market failure here is not enough education. So how does the government do that? Okay? The government does that by factoring in, so the private benefits here, the government looks at the private benefits, which the private benefits are located at the QM, which is the quantity that the market produces. But the social benefits are much greater. Okay? The socially optimum quantity, price, and quantity is greater than the quantity determined by the market. So the government will do what it can to move demand to the quantity that's efficient, where the government decides that it's efficient, this equilibrium point right here. So in order to do that, the government subsidizes or provides money for education to increase the social benefits. What does this actually do? It drives up quantity, as we can see here, but it also drives up price. Yes, it drives up price for you, the consumer, purchasing the education, but also a factor of that price is the government paying for that education. So that's a positive externality. In addition to the ones, the same graph could be held true for something like flu shots, and the same of the last graph. Negative externality could hold true for secondhand smoke or other things that in which someone who's not a buyer or seller in the market somehow receives benefits or cost from this product.